All right, let's talk about one of the all-time great business case studies, Moneyball. It's this incredible story of how cold, hard data completely upended a century of tradition and forced an entire industry to question everything it thought it knew.
So it all really boils down to this one simple but kind of profound question. For 100 years, baseball scouts, managers, owners, they were so sure they knew the answer. A winner had a certain look, right? A specific kind of physical presence. But what if? What if they were just completely wrong?
And here's where the core conflict lies. On one side, you have the look, all the things you can see with your eyes, an athletic build, a lightning-fast swing, that swagger and confidence. And on the other side, you have the result, just the numbers, the stats that measure what a player actually produces. The entire Moneyball revolution is really just the story of shifting the focus from that left column over to the right.
Okay, so to really get how radical this shift was, we've got to step back and look at the old world. For generations, baseball operated on this set of unwritten, totally subjective rules for how you find talent.
The industry was just measuring all the wrong things. Scouts were obsessed with what they called tools, these physical attributes that looked super impressive but didn't actually translate to winning. I mean, get this, they even used these bizarre, irrelevant proxies for confidence, like whether or not a player had a good-looking girlfriend. They were evaluating literally everything except what actually wins games. So yeah, the whole system was built on this massive, massive blind spot. It valued the aesthetics, how a player looked while playing the game, way more than the objective result of what they actually accomplished on the field. And here's the thing, whenever you have a blind spot that big in any industry, you create a massive market inefficiency. It's a huge opportunity for someone to come in and find value where literally nobody else is even looking.
And this inefficiency created the perfect opportunity to find what they called broken toys. These were the players the system just tossed aside because they didn't fit that perfect visual mold. Maybe they were too old, a little beat up, or had an ugly swing. But if you actually looked beneath those superficial flaws, their numbers were brilliant.
Here's a great way to think about it. The entire league was like an antique dealer who was obsessed with perfectly polished furniture. They were completely missing these amazing pieces with high-value wood just because they had some chipped paint. They were literally walking right past diamonds because they were covered in a little soot. So you see this flaw. How do you possibly exploit it? Well, you don't just change your strategy, you have to change the entire goal of the game itself. See, the old goal was to buy players, get the athletes who looked the part. The new goal was radically simple: buy wins. The individual players almost didn't matter. All that mattered was the victory they could produce. Suddenly, the game wasn't about scouting anymore, it was about solving a math problem.
And that logic followed this really clean, unbreakable chain. If you want to buy wins, you first have to buy runs. And if you want to buy runs in the most efficient way possible, you need to buy one specific statistic: on-base percentage.
Now, for anyone who isn't a huge baseball nerd, on-base percentage, or OBP, is actually super simple. It measures a player's single most important skill, their ability to not make an out. That is it. A walk is as good as a hit. Just get on base.
So armed with this new goal and this new core metric, a completely different team-building strategy emerged. It was one that essentially hacked all the financial inefficiencies of the league. When a big superstar left the team, the old way of thinking was, oh no, we have to find another superstar to replace him. The new way? Forget the individual. Instead, you just recreate their statistical production by combining the output of several cheaper, undervalued players. And the math just makes so much sense. You could lose a $20 million superstar, but instead of trying to replace him one for one, you go out and sign 3 of those broken toys. And look, together they produce the exact same statistical value for almost half the price. You're buying the same number of wins for a fraction of the cost. It's kind of like replacing a fancy luxury blender with a cheap mixer, a toaster, and a coffee maker you got at a garage sale. Yeah, they don't look as impressive on the counter, but together they get all the same jobs done for way, way less money. Okay, so the theory is brilliant. The math is totally sound. But did it actually work? Let's look at the undeniable impact this strategy had on the entire sport. This number says it all: 20. In 2002, the Oakland A's, a team built on these exact principles with one of the lowest payrolls in all of baseball, won 20 consecutive games. It was an American League record, and it was the ultimate proof. The data-driven model wasn't a fluke. It was simply a more accurate map of reality. And that level of success, it leads to something called forced adaptation. Basically,
The established powers, the rich teams that had always relied on tradition and money, they couldn't ignore the new reality anymore. They had to adapt, or they were going to risk extinction.
And you know what? They did adapt. The wealthiest teams, the ones who once laughed at this whole approach, started hiring their own statisticians. They stopped focusing only on how players looked and started digging into the data. They began hunting for their own undervalued assets and building rosters in the aggregate. They really had no choice. The game had fundamentally changed.
Ultimately, this whole story leaves us with a pretty powerful final thought. Moneyball was never just about baseball. It was about challenging that institutional inertia that tells us this is just how things have always been done. And it really makes you wonder, what traditions in your world, in your industry, are just sitting there, waiting to be disrupted by a better set of data?